All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the Ardalyst webinar today with Microsoft. Today is November 30th, so the new DFARS interim rule goes into effect today. The comment period ends, to talk about that and also CMMC today, we have Mr. Richard Wakeman from Microsoft. He is the Senior Director for Aerospace and Defense for Azure Global. And then we also have our own Chief Technology Officer, Josh O'Sullivan, the CTO and co-founder of Ardalyst. Ardalyst is a cyber defense and digital transformation company dedicated to helping organizations enhance their cybersecurity and expand their business. And moderating today, you have myself, Jessica Lawrence, lead analyst at Ardalyst, and also Charisse Ruin, our digital marketing manager. So this is our agenda today. We've already done the introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about the DFARS interim rule and then go into some Microsoft capabilities. Mr. Wakeman has been very involved in developing capabilities to help organizations meet the requirements of NIST 800-171 and CMMC. And then Josh is going to talk a little bit about what a mature cyber program is and a little bit of what Ardalyst does to help companies prepare. And then we will hopefully have some time to take some questions at the end. So to start off, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today, and let's talk a little bit about the DFARS interim rule.
Well, good afternoon, and hopefully everyone's enjoying a wonderful Monday after a long and wonderful Thanksgiving weekend. And you know, we thought, what a better way than to get over our turkey hangovers than to talk about certification and accreditation and DFARS and CMMC and NIST, and new ways to be compliant with your security programs. Well, first of all, let's talk about just what's out there right now, right? So before these new interim rule changes come into effect, we already had requirements that have been around for a couple of years around federal contract information, FCI, which really is any information that is not marked or intended for public release. So anything that's not already marked as public releasable is FCI. Then also CUI, which has been a term that's been around for about 10 years now actually, was originally initiated to make sure that the government was being transparent with all unclassified information coming out of the 9/11 report, and trying to address how the government shares information. And one of the key problems was that too much of the government's information was locked into all these different cylinders of unclassified but controlled information. So this blanket term was created, CUI, and in the last year, DoD has gone from being a late adopter when it comes to controlled unclassified information to now really a leading organization in trying to put the right controls around it. So for a while now, we've talked about how CUI is mainly, not just, is a small little bucket of things. Maybe it's just ITAR, maybe it's just controlled defense information, controlled technical information. Well, it's actually all those things. And just recently, the DoD actually launched a new website called at dodcui.mil, which is the CUI registry. And that's where we now have a consolidated list of where the DoD is saying what is basic and controlled CUI. So if you have documents that are FOUO, for example, or marked ITAR or sensitive and unclassified, all those are now called controlled unclassified information. And today's the last day of discussions about those interim rule changes, and these new provisions are going into effect. And particularly DFARS 7019, which will bring with it this requirement for self-assessment. So before you had simply attest to the core that you are being compliant with NIST 800-171, you're following the 110 controls, you have a POAM, you have a system security plan, and you have a mature cybersecurity program protecting the government's controlled and classified information. Starting today, really, so as of tomorrow, every core, if you're getting a contract either extended or a new one awarded, particularly the ones with existing 7012 clauses in them, with that you have CUI and access to CUI, then you're going to need to be able to go into the website and register your self-assessment. Now, what's interesting with that self-assessment is it's a scoring assessment. So you need to go through and count all the controls you're compliant with. Each control has a score of 1 to 5 based on severity, and you subtract that from 110. So ironically, if you have not done a single one of those controls, well, you fail automatically, but you'd have a score of negative 196. So you have to at least have an SSP and POAM, and you get 1 point for that. So you can have a negative score, negative 195, and if you need to go to the website tomorrow and register, that's the score you're putting into it. Now, that will probably be a conversation you need to have with the Corps about how you're going to improve that score and when, but that's the minimum you need to do. Provision 7019 is also going to introduce the government coming to your door, right? Particularly DCMA. They're going to come and do either on-site reviews of how you came up with that score. So they're going to just come and look at your documentation and make sure that that's compliant and that the number you put in adds up to what you put on there. Or they'll do a high version of that, a high assessment, where they'll be looking at not only what you've documented, but marrying that up with what you're actually doing and making sure that your documentation matches your practices. Now, that might sound awfully familiar. That might sound like the new cybersecurity model certification. That's also coming into effect here under DFARS Clause 7021. So that's the other end of the spectrum, where we'll have third parties coming and doing these assessments and making sure that you have a mature program and attesting that to the government that they can trust you with this information. Now, that's going to age in over the next couple of years. It's going to take a while to get those assessors certified and trained and get the program fully functioning. So for right now, the government's doing it. They'll be doing about 100 or so medium each year, or excuse me, 200 or so medium each year and about 100 or so high each year of the 800 and 171. We will also, over the next 5 years, have CMMC phased in. Now, in the middle of that is DFARS Clause 7020, which requires contractors now to support the government coming in and doing those assessments, as well as making sure that their supply chain, their subs are capable of supporting that. So to get more into depth of how to do this quicker and more effectively, I'm going to turn the conversation over here to Richard to talk through some of the wonderful things that we've been doing together with the Microsoft CMMC Acceleration Program that can apply to these requirements today.
All right, should see my desktop now too as well. Yeah, thank you. You know, one of the things I would comment on the rule change coming into effect, we've seen the ramp up to it now for a little over a year from whenever the very first discussions around CMMC came to fruition, and you know, looking at the dropping the DFARS 7019 and 7020, of course, was unexpected up until a couple of months ago. And notably, you know, of course, many organizations that are prime contractors have had to respond and ensure that they've, of course, met all the requirements for NIST 800-171, in particular in alignment with DFARS 7012. But with that DFARS 7019 going into effect, there's a lot of subcontractors there that, especially in the Tier 2, Tier 3, that will also need to go register. And historically, I think there's been less, attention made in the lower realms of the supply chain to, adhere to the requirements for DFARS 7012. So it's pretty significant. I think it's going to impact upwards of around, 30 to 40,000 companies whenever it's all said and done over the next several years as we ramp up, especially into looking at any of those organizations that align with CMMC level 3 and higher for protection of controlled and classified information. And I have here on the screen just a quick plug for the blogs that we run at the public sector tech community. This one here in the middle is the one that probably gets some of the most attention. In fact, interestingly enough, I should update the screenshot. It shows 7,000 hits. I think it's somewhere up around 40,000 now. So it's become something of a golden standard for a lot of people who look at trying to differentiate between how they achieve compliance or demonstrate compliance and the requirements that they would need for a cloud service provider. And especially in balancing, for example, what you can do in commercial versus should you need a requirement that would steer you more into our government clouds with GCC, Government Community Cloud. Which brings me to really looking at differentiating between our multiple different cloud offerings. So if you look at you know, just here in the United States, we've got multiple different data enclaves, right? And if you look at this chart, it's pretty busy, given that we've got many different enclaves. So I like to go back and just give a quick history lesson. And it also highlights the reason why we ended up with multiple different data enclaves to protect controlled unclassified information in particular. So if we go all the way back to the beginning, in fact, even before what we now know as Microsoft 365, I was one of the architects is working on deploying the very first customers into the cloud. And our first initial public multi-tenant offerings were the Business Productivity Online Suite, later revved into now what we know as Office 365, is a productivity suite that is a worldwide offering where we're able to deliver Office 365 into multiple different geographies. Now, this is a good point to highlight here is that if you look at Office 365, we do offer data residency in multiple different countries. So you can, for example, achieve data residency in the United States through a region, or you can go multi-geo with your tenant and you can get data residency in the UK, Australia, Canada, etc. And each one of those regions give you, of course, alignment with the largest set of certifications of any cloud service provider out there. And notably, it does meet many of the requirements for government, local, and industry regulations, but it did not hit the mark initially for the U.S. Government in particular with achieving FedRAMP. So approximately 8 years ago, we built a region of our commercial environment, which is called Government Community Cloud, or GCC for short. GCC is managed by U.S. persons, so it does have some characteristics of it that are meeting the requirements, especially around state and local government. You got Criminal Justice Information System, as well as IRS 1075, et cetera. So there's thousands of tenants in there for state and local government and a lot of federal civilian agencies. And along the same time that we built and construct GCC, we also came out with this Azure Infrastructure as a Service and Platform as a Service. We took a lot of the capabilities of the public multi-tenant environment and made them their own essential offerings. So if you look at Azure Active Directory or some of the networking services we have with ExpressRoute, all that's within the fabric of Azure Commercial. So you'll see, for example, GCC shares certain components like the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite are part of the commercial platform. Now that also had a benefit that we could innovate that environment really quickly as we were building out the commercial side environment, but it also had the restriction that it has a follow the sun support model, and of course the networks, et cetera, do extend outside the continental United States. Did not meet the requirements, especially that the U.S. Department of Defense had for data sovereignty in alignment with protection of export controlled data, et cetera. So we built a fully physically and virtually isolated environment for Azure Government. Primarily, when we introduced this several years back, it was specifically for the DoD and Impact Level 5. Of course, we did get FedRAMP High and various others that make it attractive for all of our government customers. It also gave us a base foundation for being able to support controlled unclassified information across our spectrum of products. So now we're able to deliver Office 365 and the Productivity Suite. Now, we built this initially for the U.S. Defense, the Department of Defense proper, as an IL5 environment. Naturally, if you look at the requirements there, it does prohibit many, especially the defense industrial base and even some of the federal cabinet level agencies from having access to it. So we built a twin copy of the DoD environment. That's what's branded GCC High. Interestingly enough, there's a lot of brand confusion over GCC High versus Azure Government. The thing to keep in mind is that GCC High is typically the branding we use for software as a service components. So that would be, of course, Office 365. Could include even Azure Active Directory is branded GCC High. Azure Government is more IaaS and PaaS, but in many cases they're interchangeable. The one thing to point out is this whole environment is managed to an IL5 control set. So we do have, for example, if you look at the equivalency, we do have the ability to say that GCC high has IL4 equivalency or IL5 based on an IL5 control set. So jumping forward into where this all translates, for many of my customers, if it comes down, they say, okay, well, I need CMMC level 3. I have controlled unclassified information that I manage. Then our default recommendation is to say that you would be best served by a deployment within the Microsoft 365 GCC High. And as you can see here, GCC High is also wed here to the Azure government environment for services like identity and networking. And you'll also see, as I illustrate, this is all what I'll refer to as the US sovereign cloud. We have a contractual amendment for export controls to include ITAR. We also have a full contractual obligation for DFARS 7012, including flowdowns. Now, if you look at that in comparison to, for example, the commercial side environment, we do not support ITAR in commercial, nor do we support ITAR in our GCC, just by virtue of the fact that we have follow the sun support model for things like Azure Active Directory, right? In terms of looking at controlled unclassified information, the one thing that's also to highlight here is that, if you look at GCC, it says, well, maybe on controlled unclassified information. What that really translates to is that there's many different categories of CUI. Of course, there's CUI basic that include just, personal identifiable information, such as for soldiers, etc. On the flip side, you have CUI specified, especially those export control data that have a no foreign requirement and a CONUS only solution, in which case we can only contractually do that within the US sovereign cloud. So maybe on some of the categories, but not all of the categories, because if you were to hold CUI to the highest watermark or the higher watermark for compliance, it would include ITAR. There's nothing within CMMC or NIST 800-171 that really differentiates between CUI that's export controlled versus CUI that's not. It would be a risk decision that you would make, especially if you decide to go into GCC. That would restrict you from being able to manage any of that CUI specified unless you have additional compensating controls in place. This is just another view of showing that, for Azure government, that we've got coverage here for US government export controls, covered defense information, etc. And a quick plug, as part of the defense industrial base, we also work with our customers for an IL6. That is our Azure government secret offering. Plugging forward, one thing I like to set is in terms of looking at how you are able to achieve compliance and demonstrate compliance on a cloud service provider platform. And that could be either Azure infrastructure as a service such as VMs, or it could be, of course, Office 365 productivity suite, that it is always a shared scope of responsibility, meaning just simply by buying GCC High doesn't mean that you're going to be compliant right out of the starting gate. There is some organization responsibility. Of course, the pie chart here would vary depending on which services you're deploying. Some software as a service definitely has a shorter putt and less organizational responsibility than if you're, for example, deploying a virtual machine into IaaS, in which case the organization's responsibility would be tremendously higher. The one thing to point out is that in terms of the shared responsibility model, Microsoft as a cloud service provider, we help enable you for compliance rather than providing compliance, as I mentioned. We also provide capabilities that our customers can use in order to implement practices, right, or controls, if you're talking NIST 800-171, with the end goal of achieving a control objective. It's vastly much more effective than satisfying a control requirement. So when you look at, for example, how you achieve compliance. Oftentimes, especially in the maturity model, CMMC has that really built into its core of saying that we're not just trying to check off a bunch of requirements. It's not a checklist per se. It's a maturity level in which you're constantly improving. And Microsoft, through our suite of products and capabilities, of course, have a tremendous impact on you being able to demonstrate compliance, especially if you get into the organization responsibility. Here's another view of the shared responsibility model. As I mentioned, the PUT is much shorter. If you look at the dark blue, that's the customer responsibility versus the lighter color blue, which is the cloud service provider, Microsoft scope of responsibility. If you're on-prem, you own it end-to-end. Naturally, if your software is a service, Microsoft will manage much more of the physical and host infrastructure, etc. The benefit there, of course, is that you're able to demonstrate compliance, leveraging a program of reciprocity that you can be able to inherit controls from Microsoft, as opposed to you having to implement an end-to-end solution, which introduced, if you look at our CMMC strategy for products, we have a program that we've put together called the CMMC Acceleration Program. What's fascinating about this program is it isn't specifically like a product. It's not something that you're going to go buy the CMMC Acceleration Program. It is basically looking at all the capabilities that Microsoft, through our products and services, can provide to you, not only to demonstrate how you can inherit from our underlying platform, but that you can be able to demonstrate compliance using our capabilities. And I'll talk a bit more about that in terms of looking at how you would leverage our feature suites to become compliant. In terms of looking at the allowable reciprocity, we've been working very closely with CMMC accreditation body, as well as other industry working groups, etc., to be able to analyze and looking at how you would be able to inherit controls from Microsoft or practices. Naturally, we have a FedRAMP High accreditation in most of our clouds now, and both, especially if you look at Azure, we've got it both in commercial and in government. There's a lot of indication now, though, especially looking at DCMA, that they're measuring, the level of inheritance that you can get from the underlying platform more from a baseline with the security requirements guide, or the cloud computing SRG, in which case we also are able to, of course, be able to provide a SRG impact level 4 and 5 within our US sovereign cloud. And that helps you to demonstrate compliance with DFARS 7012. You'll also notice that, for example, with DFARS 7012, that we're able to provide the incident reporting for subparagraph C through G within our government clouds that we do not offer in our commercial clouds. So in terms of looking at holistically, you being able to do the right level of incident reporting, then you would look for getting the DFARS 7012 from our government clouds. We also do follow a NIST cybersecurity framework within all of our clouds as well. Now, getting into a bit more of the CMMC acceleration program, to date we're targeting CMMC level 3, primarily because that's where most of the information is available. We certainly will continue to extend it beyond level 3 all the way up to a level 5. As you know, the CMMC level 3 provisional program is just now kickstarting in terms of looking at having assessors get trained, and we're looking for the level 3 assessment guide to drop here in the next week or so. And with that, we'll be able to fine tune a lot of what we've been working on with the acceleration program. Again, we're looking at more of a program that would be in alignment with those that have data handling for controlled and classified information. So that would be 3 and then ramping up to level 5 in the future. We're also working very closely with our partners like Ardalyst to be able to provide solutions And I think the sweet spot here is probably those organizations that can be fully hosted in a cloud native environment. So you can imagine many of the small businesses of the world, the tier 3 in the supply chain that can be able to lift and shift their entire IT infrastructure into Azure, as well as Microsoft 365, that it would give a platform that you would have a pre-configured environment that you could move into, and of course, if you look at all the capabilities that Microsoft can provide, it would contribute to approximately 70% of the practices for a CMMC level 3. But we would certainly work with our partner community to close that gap, right? To not only fine-tune how you would achieve that 70%, but also take you to another 100%. So we really view a lot of the CMMC acceleration program as being scaffolding for our partners to build managed solutions on. Now, that doesn't just restrict the use of this program by small companies. It is a sweet spot for it, but if you look at a lot of the big defense industrial tier 1 primes, they also are constructing shared enclaves. I often refer to them as mission enclaves. I've heard, CMMC cloud or DIB clouds, etc. But they are isolated environments that could be stood up that would be in alignment with, for example, a program of record, or even for larger companies that have a segmented business unit, such as an isolated federal or DoD business unit that works exclusively with the government. So all these would be, of course, in alignment with the pre-configured environment. To get into some of the capabilities that we've delivered, we're really happy about this product placemat for CMMC. It really demonstrates well how you're able to achieve compliance. It's a representation of the CMMC level 3. It looks like a periodic chart. And within here, it starts off with, if you have 0 products selected or enabled in the product placemat, it'll simply show you what you get to inherit from the underlying platform. And then you're able to start layering and drilling down. It's a fully interactive representation where you could say, okay, well, let me look at how, for example, Microsoft Azure Sentinel would contribute. And if you can select that product, then it'll, of course, light up many of the CMMC practices, especially around audit and accountability. That's out in the private preview now. We plan on releasing it in a public preview in just a couple of short weeks. But it's really useful in a couple of different ways. Not only does it demonstrate how all of the different products in the Microsoft 365 product suite, including the security suite, would contribute to your compliance. It also gives customer implementation guidance. So it would show you, okay, well, if you implement this specific product, let's say Sentinel, then here's how it implements, how it impacts a specific a CMMC practice. So you can drill down and see customer implementation guidance and practice implementation details. Our end goal is to take a lot of the work that we've built for this product placemat and be able to apply it to these reference architectures or pre-configured environments, so that you would have many of the statements that you would need for a system security plan that would be pre-filled for you. So you can imagine if you were to implement our capabilities based on a set of recommended guidance, that we could be able to provide you with a mini SSP or a system security plan that you're able to then in turn incorporate into your more monolithic, holistic SSP for your organization. One of our GRC tools that we have, Microsoft 365, has the Microsoft Compliance Manager. Super interactive environment that we've been working on for several years. It went general availability at Ignite just last month. The Compliance Manager has the ability to overlay these what are called assessment templates. And we have today a series of assessment templates that include NIST 800-171, as well as CMMC levels 1 through 5 and DFARS 7012, etc. The benefit there is if you overlay it, it'll use an interactive view to essentially audit your current configuration of Microsoft 365 and generate a score. And that score would be in alignment with how many of the practices that you've implemented. For example, if you have an assessment template for CMMC, it would give you a score based on how many of the practices. Now, one of the first questions or observations I got is this score in alignment with NIST 800-171A that you'll need to, of course, submit to the SPRS system? And the short answer is no. Today it's more of an arbitrary thing that the developers of the compliance manager put together. That we have been talking to various folks in terms of that feedback to see if we can better align it with NIST 800-171A. But with that, it does give you a score. It also gives you recommendations and actions that you can do to raise your score. Like, for example, it may say you should implement multi-factor authentication or just-in-time administrative privileged identity management, etc. In which case, if you were to implement those, it gives you a set of steps in how to implement those. And then if you do, complete them and it will raise your compliance score. We have a very similar capability that on the Azure side of the house, this is more for infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. It's still called Azure Security Center, but it's part of a bigger suite of capabilities called Azure Defender for Server. In which case, we've got a similar dashboard with a scoring mechanism, except for instead of them being called assessment templates, they're called Azure Blueprints. Azure Blueprints are more than just policy initiatives, though. They give the ability to lay down the policy where you can get a set of actions that are aligned with, for example, CMMC level 3. And the more that you satisfy those, it would, of course, raise your secure score. We also have built into it the ability to even take actions directly from the Azure Security Center. So our initial release of the CMMC blueprints are in preview now, and we'll have them go public preview in January timeframe. In terms of looking at the initial release of the CMMC level 3 blueprint, it is policy specifically, but we're working on in early 2021 the ability to incorporate in the automation as well. So you can raise your score by being able to deploy a reference architecture and have the blueprints itself be able to configure things like logging and analytics. Which brings me to Azure Sentinel plays a major role. I'd say the two big products that play such a critical role in CMMC, regardless of what the workload is. It could be, a virtual machine in Azure. It could be an Exchange mailbox in Office 365. Is the ability to have your right incident management solution, information and event management solution in place. Azure Sentinel is our cloud native SIEM solution. And it is pre-wired in which way it can be able to ingest the logs from Azure as well as from Office 365. And of course, you can see the whole suite of products that Microsoft offers. And you can ingest those into Azure Sentinel to give you signals, right, that would in turn be able to help you to not only find where you've got vulnerabilities, but also to act on those vulnerabilities and to give you insights into how you're achieving or being able to demonstrate compliance with CMMC. The one really interesting call out is that it's not only just aligned with Microsoft products. You'll also see here listed the ability for us to use Azure Sentinel in a full hybrid configuration with being able to work with your on-premises solutions, as well as even other third-party cloud service providers like AWS. We also have SOAR capabilities by being able to integrate Sentinel in with Azure Logic Apps and Microsoft Flow. So it's not just a visual representation, it can also trigger actions, in which case it can go and remediate certain things. We have a set of workbooks that are now in preview We plan on having the public preview roll by the end of December, in which case you'll be able to use, it's a sample workbook that's for CMMC all the way up to level 5 actually, with over 200 panels for covered practices. So a quick just view of it, which is pretty busy. We'll of course be able to provide you with the real download here for these workbooks here in just a couple of short weeks. But you can see all the panels that are in alignment with, especially with the CMMC practice families from access control, account auditability, etc. And that brings me to the end of this particular presentation. I would say I'd invite you to come look at my blogs. I do have, we have many more capabilities that we have planned for release in the CMMC Acceleration Program, from reference architectures to the ability to provide documentation that you could turn directly over to a C3PAO auditor, to include many system security plans, control implementation statements, summaries, etc.
Wow, that's a lot. Thank you, Richard. And I'm going to build on that platform a little bit of what Richard just talked through. Because what I think the second point here is how Microsoft is building this 70% solution that really makes a lot of the challenges. It's everyone's supposed to be NIST HARE-1 compliant right now. However, we've been getting a lot of phone calls, and we've developed these evaluations. We'll even help go through and take your SSP and POAM and build out a score for you. And believe it or not, there's a number of folks out there that are discovering that maybe they don't have the SSP and POAM. And so we've been going on with a couple of customers here, their journey building out that SSP and POAM. And it's amazing to be able to take the placemat and take all the work that Microsoft has done, the investment they've made, and really stand on the shoulders of that giant, and be able to, rather than recreate the wheel, be able to really take that and run with it. And so, Richard, I really appreciate what Microsoft's been doing for the community here, as we're trying to become more compliant, more secure, more defendable. And as we work through what is a mature program, right, of where we're trying to get to, what CMMC, Katie Arrington's trying to drive us to, what the broader DoD issues, and this is really a bipartisan issue when it comes to how we defend the DIB. And this is not necessarily easy. It's doable, but it's not easy, right? There's a number of different controls and practices that need to be put in place. Those controls and practices need to be built together in policies and programs. You need a continuous operational cycle of experts in terms of the technology, in terms of the policy, in terms of threats, and bringing those people together. Now, when we look at the DIB and we look at the numbers that the DCMA put out of the type of companies out there, 73% of the DIB is less than 250 people, right? And well, what's that mean? Even at that size, there's a very small group of IT support, maybe one or two security folks, maybe an IT director, maybe a CIO, probably not a CISO. And so the challenge here is, how do we get started? And so Ardalyst has been working with Microsoft and with others to build out a curated program, right? So a guide to how to become a mature cybersecurity program, which is exactly what's required for CMMC. Now, we recognize that this journey of understanding those compliant practices and controls and putting them into practice, and then doing that continuously, takes time. So if you're out there and you recognize that your score is going to be -196 when you go through and do this assessment, and you do your basic assessment, plan for 6 months to maybe a year and a half to really get to 110, to a score of 110. Now, with the work that Microsoft's done in terms of doing that 70% of it, a good chunk of that road is now already covered, right? Through the inheritance that you can get through this infrastructure. Now, to get from the 70% point to the 100% point, which roughly gets you from a score of 0 to 110 on the DoD's new assessment methodology, part of this new provision 7019. In getting you to then really this entry point into CMMC, we built out this program, right? Now, it really consists of 3 things because we don't expect our customers, we don't expect everyone in the defense industrial base to become cybersecurity experts, become NIST and CMMC experts. We expect you're going to need different expertise, and you probably can't afford 3 or 4 different people. So we've consolidated this of expertise from a governing perspective, expertise from a hardening perspective, expertise from a defending perspective, and collapsed that as a Microsoft Gold partner with security and also digital transformation, really, into a service, an accessible service that's really about managing your cybersecurity program and helping you mature it and guide you to maturing it. And so, that amazing foundation that Microsoft provides, we then help you build your program on top of. And it's in our name, right? We're passionate change agents. We're ardent catalysts, and we've been doing this for a while. We continue to work with the government. We continue to work with industry of bringing our decades of experience in terms of mission applications and business applications combined with resiliency engineering and full spectrum cyber operations. Those in itself, boiling that down to what would be $1 billion cyber defense program into a very accessible, per user kind of program is we think a game changer for here. So, if you're finding yourself here right now with the score of a negative 196, maybe 195, and you need help, then you should be getting on the Microsoft platform. You should be buying GCC High, and you should call Ardalyst to help you with that and get you to help guide you to the 110. All right, I think we have a little bit of time here for questions and whatnot, and I will be turning it over to Charisse to help guide us.
We don't have any questions at the moment, but we might give just a few seconds here to see if anybody has anything based on what you just talked about.
All right. Well, while everyone else is working on questions, how about Richard, I've been dying to ask, when we talk about GCC High here, and there's ITAR and FCI and CUI and FOUO, and now we're the specified and everything else. Why is the maybe there?
Yeah, in terms of looking at, there's certain things that we can say are black and white, right? So, for example, if you're looking for a contractual obligation from Microsoft for full coverage of controlled and classified information, we can only do that in our U.S. sovereign cloud. So that's a combination of the Microsoft 365 GCC High, as well as, of course, its marriage with Azure Government. Now, if you look at some organizations say, well, I don't have any FOUO, I don't have any ITAR data, can I do this in commercial or can I do it in GCC? And it really is a risk decision because, as I mentioned before, the maybes there, for example, for CUI, in that, there are ways that you can be able to implement mitigating controls, even within commercial, that can be able to protect certain types of CUI, those that would, of course, enable you to, for example, identify, label, and provide access control around it so that only authorized people have access to it. If you're beginning to talk about having a strategy that can protect QE all up to include not just PII and personal identifiable information, but also would include full coverage for the higher watermark that you would need for example, only have U.S. persons access to it, like with export controlled data. Then now you look at having that requirement, for not only for being able to provide the right level of personnel on the cloud service provider side, but also a commitment from Microsoft that we have things like, for example, the DFARS 7012 provision in place so that we can do things like incident reporting with subparagraph C through G. So oftentimes what it really boils down to is if you If you need the safest course, in which case you wouldn't have to do implementation of additional mitigating controls like third-party encryption on your documents, then GCC High would be the path that many customers have chose to go down. I did see here a question: how do you procure GCC High? So there's a couple of different avenues. Of course, if you have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, you can be able to provide eligibility for the government cloud and create a new enrollment on that existing enterprise agreement. If you do not have an enterprise agreement today, then there is a set of resellers that we have. They're called AOSG resellers that are able to transact, especially those enrollments that would be less than 500. Because oftentimes the ones that were written by a traditional LSP would be a licensing specialist would be larger than 500. So sub 500, we typically point most of those to our ASG partners. There is a link that we can share. It is the Microsoft 365 How to Buy article that we have in our documentation that not only explains how you can procure it, how to do eligibility, but you can also get a list of those AOSG partners. That's
great. And you know, just to put a call out there, Ardalyst does work with a number of AOSGs. You know, we do a lot of different business, and so when folks call us, we're happy to help coordinate and connect with the right licensing structure and figuring out kind of who, where, and everyone else. Now, you know, I was thinking about, because when GCC High is a little bit more expensive, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, and it's interesting because with GCC High comes with the controls and DFARS support, ITAR support's all spelled out. Do you think that it's going to help in terms of when either a government assessor shows up from GCMA, or when a C3PAO from the CMMC, you know, the certified accreditation body, you know, that they've been certified? Is there going to be a difference if you're using commercial or using GCC High? Is it worth the additional cost?
Yeah, I think that there's some indication that both the guidance that are being provided to the C3PAO auditors, as well as with DCMA, is that they're looking more for a control set that aligns with the SRG, as opposed to just FedRAMP High or just FedRAMP in general. You know, historically, DFARS 7012 just said that you require a cloud service provider is FedRAMP moderate or quote unquote equivalent. This left a lot of gray area in terms of selection of cloud products, because there's many products out there that are offered that are FedRAMP moderate or equivalent that do not have government clouds, right? And it's typically where you see those cloud service providers that offer government clouds like Microsoft and Amazon and Box, etc., that we've done the additional work that's required in order to meet the requirements for an SRG, impact level 4 or 5. So if you look at, you know, DCMA and the assessors, they may say, okay, well, if you're in an IL4 or equivalent environment, then we know that you know, your baseline architecture is going to support CUI, including covered defense information, etc. If you're not, then there's going to be some additional level of scrutiny that you'll get in being able to demonstrate compliance in either commercial or GCC. I think a big one that's really going to be a hard one to prove is if you're in commercial and you've got a DFARS 7012 requirement, especially with flowdown. Mm-hmm. We do not do that in commercial for incident reporting. So you know, we don't provide any guidance that explains what mitigating controls you can put into commercial if you were to try and do the incident reporting on your own. So that is definitely a big gap in terms of selecting commercial over GCC High, right?
So it sounds like that it would probably be a quicker, less painful certification and assessment process, with less likelihood of getting a hiccup there in terms of getting certified. And then also it sounded like you might take the risk of putting things on commercial, but if you have some kind of spillage or other incident, you're kind of you're left out there by yourself, and now have to explain to the government why you were mishandling CUI.
Yeah, that's right.
Boy, that's fascinating. And it looks like we got another question here. So as a small business with minimal CUI, and rolling out 365 commercial right now, right? They've taken advantage of the small business, it was called Small Business Premium, their set of licenses. It's got some great security features baked in. It's affordable, it's really robust, and they're doing that right now. Maybe one or two CUI things there. What should they be doing? Do they just stop what they're doing? Is there a way to on-ramp into GCC High?
So there's not specifically a direct migration path from commercial to GCC High. And if you're in a point to where you're just now rolling out into commercial or small business and you have the opportunity to pivot before you're in too far, then that may be the less painful path to go down with deployment into one of our government clouds. Now, that said, the more and more deployed you are into a particular environment, let's just say you go ahead and move forward with commercial, in the future, if you were to pick up a contract that would have more requirements for CUI, then you may be in a predicament in which case you have no choice but to go and deploy into commercial. Then you have the added, into GCCI. Now you'll have the added complexity of either having to migrate from commercial to GCC High or to straddle, what I call a cross-sovereign cloud solution. Now, many of my customers do straddle a cross-sovereign cloud solution. So it is, there are capabilities, but I can tell you that it's less than trivial because you end up with, a separate set of policies on one side versus the other. And if you're a small business, trying to straddle two different tenants at the same time could end up even being more expensive because you may need to double license or dual license some of the people that need accounts in both commercial and swivel seat over into government.
Boy, that sounds complicated fast.
Yeah, it can be. And many of my customers that are migrating from commercial to government end up naturally in that situation because you need to have both accounts available to you at the same time to be able to migrate from one to the other. So, if you do have the opportunity to go ahead and roll forward, especially if you know that you've got requirements or you may pursue business in the future that may have requirements for CUI and you're a small business, I would definitely recommend GCC High over commercial.
And if you've already implemented, right? Like, okay, we're already on board. We're on the commercial tenant there. Does it make sense to just lift and shift, or is it better to maybe do a pilot here, do a test run with a small instance? I know it takes some time to get those licenses. Generally takes a month or two to really get the whole government enclave built out, as compared to the commercial tenant.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that comes up that's a challenge of trying to straddle or do even a proof of concept in government while you're homed in commercial is that you'd have to set up a completely different set of domains. So your email addresses would be different, right? Your user ID would be different. If many of my small businesses that I work with, if they decide to move from commercial into GCC High, they would do a direct cutover migration, and that ultimately would give you the opportunity to keep your email address, right, and your user ID, as opposed to having to set up. But yeah, if you did a proof of concept or just had a few select swivel seat users in your organization, it's not out of the question to just have a completely separate set of accounts for them in GCC High. As long as you've got a really good data exfiltration prevention on that government side, if you get start to support CUI there, because it's really, in some cases, it may be unintentional to accidentally spill from one side to the other if a user has access to both environments at the same time.
Right. And you know, looks like we got another question here about parity. You know, so you know, Microsoft, very innovative, always building, adding new capabilities to platforms. What's the feature parity there between GCC high and commercial? Is it the exact same experience? Is there a time delay to it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, we've put a tremendous amount of investment into many of our product suites, especially around Azure, to be at full parity with commercial, at least for the capabilities that make sense. There's some capabilities that just don't make sense in a sovereign cloud, but we are, you know, very close to, and by the first half of next calendar year, we'll be at full parity and with infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. In which case, you know, we'd be into a rhythm of being up to date within 30 days of a release of a specific capability. Now that is restricted to anything that's general availability. So it won't always be the same because there are new features and functions that are in preview, some of which stay in preview for longer than you imagine in commercial before they're going to, you know, ultimately get general availability and move over into government. Now, it's a little different story for software as a service. It lags behind a bit further. A big part of that does have to do with the accreditation process that we do for the productivity suites, a bit different. We go through an agency ATO process there. So the lag time there can often be, you know, once a product goes general availability within the productivity suite, you know, Office 365, then we need to go through and get the authorizations for those capabilities as well. So you'll see a bit longer 6 to 12 month lag time. Now, once we do get certain capabilities into place and within the authorization boundary, then we're able to roll updates to those products quicker. But that is why, for example, you see a lag time that we've had with getting Microsoft Information Protection released. A lot of that does have to do with the additional work we have to do for the authorization.
Yeah, which is a fantastic set of capabilities, and you know, it's amazing to see what's in commercial and as it's moving to the GCC high. You know, and I think you know, there's a benefit there though. The government's also going through and inspecting and giving that ATO. So when it comes to, you know, if you as a customer have confidence in the infrastructure you're using going to be acceptable to government or not, and you know, right out of the bat, it's getting ATO'd by the government. That's great. So I think we're running up here on time, and you know, I think the last question here that you know, Richard, if you were king for a day here, what is the one thing that you would want to make better here with CMMC and NIST, and you know, make better for the defense industrial base here from a cybersecurity perspective?
You know, one thing that I see that many people struggle with is that there is, you know, there's technology to solve certain problems, right? For example, if you look at technology within the Microsoft platform and say, hey, we need a FIPS 140-2 compliant encryption screen, right? You know, and how do you effectively apply that encryption, you know, in order to achieve compliance with, let's just say, protecting ITAR data effectively? The one thing I've seen that's been a lack of clarity throughout the entire community, this extends from the DoD on down into the National Defense ISAC, into, you know, just the working groups in general, is there isn't specifically for example, a taxonomy that can be leveraged for data protection that everybody agrees on. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's of course the DoD CUI registry, but you know, going in and setting up 20 plus labels or sensitivity labels or markings, you know, for defining encryption is going to, you know, it needs to be a simpler process. I think having a data protection strategy that's agreed upon by the industry that can be mapped into the technology that Microsoft provides is top of mind. And that's not something that Microsoft can just go and, you know, develop in a vacuum and say, here, you should use our definition of, whatever. Today, for example, the default sensitivity labels that we have are just like, high sensitivity, but that doesn't translate to export control data or CUI in particular. So
right.
Being able to have that and work with Microsoft to best implement that set of data protection policies, and of course DLP rule definitions would all be that would be top of mind for me.
Oh yeah, I would. That would be amazing, right? It's been interesting from the defense perspective, where the MITRE attack framework has grown, just in terms of having a common language about how we're dealing with specific tactics and techniques and procedures that an attacker is using against the infrastructure. Having that for describing how we're doing our policies and practices sounds like would be, really helpful, not just from a implementation perspective, but also even from an assessment and automation and protecting your system. That sounds fantastic.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we're running out at the hour here, Richard. I really appreciate your time today and walking us through kind of this platform that we can go and get from -196 to 110 more quickly and effectively.
Yeah, thank you for having me here today.
Great, thanks you guys. I'd like to give a special thank you to you both and thank our attendees for joining us today for working with Microsoft to bring CMMC/NIST 800-171 compliance to the defense industrial base. If we did not get to your question today, or if you think of a question later, please feel free to email us at info@ardalyst.com. A recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you later, along with some other helpful resources, including information on Ardalyst's free NIST 800-171 evaluation and more, so your organization can get started on your journey to CMMC compliance. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and be sure to visit us online at www.ardalyst.com/events to register for our upcoming webinar, Executive Understanding of Cybersecurity, on December 16th. And we'll see you again soon.